Every day, your City of Tempe staff goes above and beyond to make sure our community gets the best possible services and the most for our tax dollars. But how good is good? How do you measure it? And how do we know what we really need to make progress on some of our most pressing issues? To guide us, we developed a series of goals designed to help us improve our community based on our Tempe City Council's 5 strategic priorities. Reaching for excellence, we are comparing ourselves against the rest of the nation as well as ourselves. Some of our goals will help save lives. Some of them will help us save money. All of them will help us make Tempe a better place. Tempe Accelerates is an opportunity for you to get involved. Hear what city staff and community partners are doing to reach our goals. Your role? You are a vital part of our community. Share your ideas and help us craft better solutions. Ask questions. Be part of the conversation either in person or online. Check tempe.gov/Tempe Accelerates for dates and times of our next programs and collaborate with us at Tempe City Hall. Today, we will hyper-focus on 2 performance measures. Each presenting team will have 10 minutes to share data, strategies, and progress on a performance measure. Then, you will have about 10 minutes to ask questions or offer suggestions and ideas. On the back of your agenda, we have resource questions to help you participate in the conversation. Also included with your agenda is a quick survey with space you can use to include any ideas or suggestions you might have about today's topics. Thank you for participating. Now, let's accelerate.
All right. Welcome, everyone. And thank you for being here for another session of Tempe Accelerates. I don't have a whole lot to add to what you just saw, other than to welcome up our first presenting team, who will be presenting on Performance Measure 2.15, Participation in City Decision-Making Process, Connecting with Our Community. So if the presenters like to come up, and we'll get started. After they're done, we will hear from Performance Measure 3.15, ADA Compliance, Equal Access for Everyone. So let's get right to it. Thanks.
I was told I could stand or sit. Is that all right?
You can stand or sit.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Shauna Warner, and I'm with Neighborhood Services, and the rest of the team is in the audience as well. We are small but mighty 3. Laura Kaifas and Elizabeth Thomas round out the rest of the office. Guys wave. And so our performance measure, as Andrew said, is 2.15, and it is to achieve a very satisfied or satisfied with the feeling invited and welcome to participate in city decision-making processes greater than or equal to the national benchmark cities. And our measurement is one of those tied to the community service survey that we do every year. Currently, our target is 33%. We are already exceeding it at 46.5 from last year's community survey. So what we are looking at, and we didn't have the information for you today, but we're working with a vendor that conducts a community survey to look at what those numbers might mean if we were in the top 10% instead of just getting the very satisfied or satisfied to give us a goal. And we might already be there, but we don't know. So we will be looking at that and coming back. So this matters because really here in the city, what we love about Tempe, and we're all Tempe residents and love working in our community, is just the value that is placed on the diverse perspectives and getting the community involved in those decisions that are going to directly impact them. And so that our goal here is to really improve that participation and outreach to help inform decision making and hopefully make that decision better and based on what the community has said and get to what they want to see happen. And you see a picture there of one of our new parks we've recently opened, and we're going to get into a lot more detail about what we do and how we do it, but that is just a great example where it's directly what residents want that they get to see realized. And then effective public participation, this just kind of, I'm not going to read the bullets to you, but kind of gets a little more in-depth in how that can help the community in feeling involved in what's happening and trying to give as many as we can a variety of ways to offer that. You know, Andrew was talking about before we started, you know, why the boards are white. And a lot of it, you know, isn't us trying to tell them what we want or what to do, but really opening it up to them. And you'll see, you know, some examples. We'll play games, use a lot of variety of methods to try to get them engaged versus some of just, you know, and still do some of the old school measures of getting input as well. And then key to that really is managing that expectation and providing that clear understanding of their role in the process, how that input will be used. It is just one piece of what's considered when making decisions. You are still going to have policy considerations, any kind of relevant data, depending on the type of project. You might be looking at some safety issues or, you know, other measures you want to consider. So you are still relying on some professional guidance from staff within the process. And then just as some background for some of you who may not be familiar with it, is we were the first city in Arizona to adopt a public involvement manual. That happened back in 2007 after an extensive public engagement process to get there. And that really sets the standard, provides that consistency, the continuity among departments within the city of how we're going to go get input, whether it's our residents or businesses, whatever the stakeholders are. And then we updated that in 2015 to reflect a lot of the new tools that we have available with us, especially as we'll talk about some of the online tools that we use to engage. And it really does set out the tools and resources when you talk about, and that's what the 1 through 8, when you go through those with the relevant departments, talk about who is your target audience, what does that look like? You do a lot of analysis on the makeup of that area, what are the most effective ways then to reach out to them? How do you make yourselves available, and where is all key to getting good engagement? So some of what our office does is that we work with those departments to lead the public engagement efforts, to see what it is exactly they want to get from the public, and then try to tailor that outreach, develop those strategies to really involve them in a meaningful way. And then also part of that communication is also some of the impacts when the city is out there with capital projects. And then something we're going to talk about more later is we do have some of our voluntary community organizations in our division also then serves as that link and liaison with those groups in the city to get information to them, as well as have them bring information to us. And so reference these somewhat, but your type of outreach is going to be relevant to the type of project you're talking about. So this just kind of gives some examples of the different projects the city's involved in. Long-range planning efforts, some of our service planning. You see there an event where with the new pilot to bring green waste recycling to neighborhoods, we went out and sat in a neighborhood and actually brought the cans to them. And they could roll one right back to their house and take it with them. And as well as utilizing that as an opportunity for that one-on-one contact. You know, they can talk to us, give input into the program, how we're doing, what else they'd like to see, as well as some of our capital improvements where you are having some larger impacts. There's a lot of variety of methods we use. This is just a representation of some of those. Postcards, we are still direct mailing. That is, those and door hangers are kind of a way to really, that it gets in their hands. And so some of that is just doing your best to make sure they're aware of what you're doing, and it's always obviously going to be up to them whether they choose to engage. We have found when the project lends itself to it, on-site signage is very helpful, and that's particularly helped in our parks where people are driving by them, or even for those who may visit and not live in the area, it's that visual reminder. Those are a little harder to use depending on the type of project and how big it gets. Jeff with code compliance is here, and he doesn't like us sticking signs everywhere, so we don't do that quite so often. And then we also have online tools. We partner with our public information officers on all of our citywide projects to get the word out with Facebook or Twitter or any of our new e-notifications. Nextdoor, the city's been on now more recently, and that actually gets directly to over 16,000 Tempe residents, and they're averaging about 100 and 200 new members every week that come on, and that's a way to get it out to them as well, and you can target that geographically, and it's Tempe residents, so that's been a huge resource for us. Also online, we have a picture up there of one of our park projects, and that shows a template that we use where no matter at what time they engage with us, they can go back and see it's part of the transparent process. exactly what's been done, all of the meeting information, any kind of public input we've collected to that point, and they can always go back to the website and see the history of what that was and what people were saying and what we heard. And so those are kept updated as well and are a huge help. Some of how we collect input is we still do just regular meetings, but we also do a lot of more informal events. We spend a lot of Saturdays in our parks, set up in city facilities where people can come by, talk to us, and as well as a more informal way, but you're still collecting that needed important information where they can find us. We had to throw Sparky in. ASU is a big part of our community, and so we're on campus. Just sometimes, we're on the mall with a tent set up where we're able to get information out as well as collect information from the students that are there. And just how you're collecting information, we do a lot of surveys and data collection, and it's not all just that paper survey you hand out. We do try to use more interesting ways of collecting that might speak to them, whether it's pictures, they do some voting with dots, as well as just the usual polls and surveys can also be helpful. And then we have a formal online engagement tool, which is the forum, tempe.gov/forum. And that's also meets those transparency goals of you get to see everyone's comments as they're commenting versus going in a portal on the back end. It is visual there for everyone to take a look at. Touched a bit on this, but some of who we involve is tailored to the project, depending on the area, what we're looking at. But key to the outreach is trying to hit those diverse populations, seeing who's directly affected, seeing where there might be gaps. The key to really the public involvement is continuously reevaluating and looking at it. Okay, who have we heard from? Who are we still not hearing from? So that we can either go back and do more, try different approaches. And so the picture there is actually just this last week. we're renovating a park near Arredondo School. So we have a great relationship with the school districts. I went on campus there at Arredondo Elementary School, and 252 students rotated. Every student that attended that day came through and talked to us about what they'd want to see in their playground. And it's so fun to see because their results compared to the adult ones we get through the regular process, different, completely different. So it's always nice to be able to go back and say, here's what your parents said, here's what they'll really play with. And then you can kind of balance that and deliver a playground then that they're super excited about and they'll come out and use. Again, with our community organizations, we have very strong ones here in Tempe. We have our 81 neighborhood associations. Those are the orangey shapes on the map, and those are self-formed. So at some point they got together. It's not the city telling them and said, we want to be an association. We share similarities. There's something here that we want to organize around and work together to make our neighborhood better. And so those are the ones in the orange. We have 132 homeowner associations. Those are going to be your more formal legal organizations. And then we do have affiliate associations, and those are spread throughout Tempe. Sometimes they're concentrated in certain areas, other times they're citywide. And they really have at their core purpose the betterment of neighborhoods in whatever form that may be, and work together in various ways to do that. So then our performance measure has 3 strategies to try to move that baseline. And so the first one is that people know how and when they can participate. So this is really looking at refining those systems of collecting input. There's always new and creative ways to do that. So as much as we can keep up with that and try to put it out there, see what works, what people will respond to. Same thing with how we're communicating, how they can get involved, when, for what, and just really making sure that there's synergy with that citywide and that projects aren't really done in isolation. A lot of times we'll have stuff going on in the same area. And so we don't want to confuse our stakeholders, residents, businesses with multiple meetings, multiple messages. So a lot of times we will try to look at how we're doing that and try to communicate to them. And then, like I had mentioned, just always that evaluation piece is it working? Are we doing it correctly? How can we do it better? The second strategy that you see there is talking about, is the input followed on? Do residents know they've been heard? And so part of what the public involvement manual lays out, and as part of what we also do in our office, is that formal documentation that we're tracking all of that. We know where the comments came from, what they said, meeting all of those public records requirements, aggregating that feedback, and then key to that is closing that loop, that they know what input was given, was considered. And those are just some examples. The one with the purple kind of massing is an older one, but for Orbit Saturn, when they routed the new route, we went out, talked to residents, said, where would you take it? Where do you want to go? What do you want to see? And they got to decide the route. And it was very much informed by somewhat of what makes sense for a transit system and trying to stay off the arterials, but also very much informed by where they want to go, what places they choose to visit in their neighborhood. And then the other picture up there shows with our recent splash playground that's being installed at Kiwanis, what elements do they want to use? What do they want to see? And that was completely up to them and what they chose to do. And then the third strategy relates directly to our community organizations and getting to a 90% participation rate of homes that are included in those associations. The first piece of that is, we know by the map we've got some spread there, but we aren't quite sure exactly how many, so we'll kind of get those numbers, see where we are, put out some information for areas where one doesn't exist, and then also key to that is making sure we're always building capacity within those that are already organized and making sure that they're supported and being able to build community, because they do serve as that strong link to participate and feel included in that. And that is it.
Now's the time, if you have any questions for Shauna about the presentation. We are available in the back there with the mic. If not, I can get things rolling. I always like to prime the pump if I have to. Question, we talk about the satisfaction of residents in our communication. I'm assuming you mean from the citizen satisfaction survey? Is that?
Our goal is specifically related to feeling that they were involved in city decision-making. So there's another measure about how well they're communicating. There's one that's specific to communication, and if it's availability of information, and even if there's a question that asks if they've interacted with the city. So there's various ones. This one is specific to involved in city decision-making, feeling welcomed and invited.
So does that include surveying those who participate in public processes
This
about?
is strictly community
Okay.
survey.
But that's something that maybe could help with the strategies in the future to actually, 60 or 70 people show up to talk about a park renovation, asking them how we did would be part of potentially of looking at, kind of fleshing out that metric, not just generally, but specifically the people who were there, how did they feel
Yes, like
our
an exit
process
survey.
did? Yeah, like an exit survey, exactly. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Shauna. Thanks, Shauna. I know your office does a great job of the outreach to the residents, and the city council expressed some desire to try to expand the number of neighborhood associations and homeowner associations that apply for grant funding. Is that part of your strategy here, that you reach out to those folks and increase that number of organizations that get grant funding through our neighborhoods program?
So what we are covering in this performance measure is only a fraction of what our office actually does. So that is something we're working on, but not related to the measure, if that makes sense. Because it's, we're focusing on your larger involvement in building the capacity of those community organizations, which certainly could be whether they get a grant or not, because that is a piece of it, but that's not specific to the measure. And I would just like to, just based on Ken's question, so when we do outreach, it's not just residents. We're looking at everyone in the project area. So we also work a lot with our businesses, with our school districts, our faith community, really anyone in the area that we want to get input on. So I know sometimes when they hear neighborhood services, they think it's just neighborhoods, but it really is the entire community and anyone who might be impacted and want to get engaged. So we really do look at a larger focus than just residents.
Okay, this is on. It's interesting in that whole continuum of ways that you communicate with residents, and I'm a resident, so I, get the things on my doorknob, or I get the surveys and all. And maybe you said this, and I apologize if I missed it, but which of those ways to talk to residents and get their input do you think is the most, what do you get the most response to? And I think about, one of the challenges that we have, like with HR, is getting out to employees. And sometimes one of the things I hear back is, well, we don't read those emails. I just wonder what your sense is about what's the most effective way to get to people, to get them to respond back. And I'm asking for selfish reasons, because maybe you have some insights that I can use.
It really, it does vary a lot based on project type. For example, with our parks, our first round of capital improvements, we were big on, we got to share so much information. There's so much we want to tell them. We're doing PowerPoints or things. And, we got people there, but certainly not maybe what we were expecting. And so, the next round we went and we sat in the park. We set up shop. And it was, so you got those who wanted to be there as well as those who were just using the park. And none of us are shy. Craig and I are running out. If someone's walking their dog, we walk right up to them. Hey, we're out here talking about the park. We go grab them. We don't care. And so you really, I think sometimes, like for that, it was especially helpful to put yourself in the place of, and to do multiple hours. It wasn't just Saturday mornings. If, we would try a weekday afternoon if we had time and sit there for an hour and just grab whoever's there. So sometimes kind of that more informal putting you out there is helpful. But quite honestly, what we see probably, if I was going to generalize across the board, is we get much more now online input than we do in person. So when we hand out these surveys, we probably almost get twice as many back that didn't come to a meeting but just want to go online and fill it out. And so that's why it's important, I think, that we do have a robust and easy to use and a survey tool online that allows us to do some of what we do in person, whether it's use more pictures or kind of create an online conversation that isn't just multiple choice, which, is something we're working on. Because people are engaging that way so much more, we want to make sure then we can ask the same questions, because you hate to not ask a question just because it's hard to replicate online. Because sometimes you're stymied by that and you're like, how am I going to ask this if they're only going to go online and ask? It's not quite the same as sitting there and having that discussion of where would you build? Where would you put these pieces? What does that look like? So, and the technology for that is increasing so much, and Stephanie's been a good resource for that as well with some of the, we, for a character area, took the iPad out and they could play with it and be like, with the map she drew, this is what that means, this is where I would put that kind of stuff. And so trying to use that more, because they will respond online versus having to show up in person, and everyone's busy.
See the door hanger, written communication going away? Do you think that always, I'm seeing heads shake down there. No.
Aging population, yeah. And
Population, watch.
we should. You got to use my.
They get like a postcard, or they'll see it in their association newsletter, or maybe they get a Facebook post, but then they get a postcard or a flyer, and it just is a reminder, because everyone's so busy that, just like with your kids' schools or your church or anything else, sometimes it's the third time you see it, you're like, ooh, here's a deadline, or I really want to be involved in this, or this is why it's important. So
People show up like with the postcard, and that's how they found out, and that's why they came. And so it's, you got to do everything. The problem is you can't just do that either, and so you still got to like get at them so many different ways, because for some people they don't look at the mail, or they don't ever pick up their mail. And so that's the key with offering a variety, otherwise you won't hit everyone if you try to do it just one way. Donuts help. Yes.
Is there any difference in how you inform people when you're giving bad news or good news? Like, street closures, or digging the front yard because you're installing pipes or whatever it is, versus, improving the parks?
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on the direct impact, there's many Saturdays Laura's out there knocking on people's door and saying, hey, you're out of water for a few hours. So, yeah, absolutely. Depending on the impact and how directly, it's going to affect that resident or business. Some businesses, if they can't run, if we're out there doing that. So, yeah, sometimes we'll do it when it's an emergency. Other times we do that footwork prior to kind of talk to them and say, hey, what works best for you, so you can frame what you're going to do around what helps them most. Laura will add to that too.
I think another thing we've done in the last year or so is really train our contractors that work for us on CIP projects to be a lot better with their public interface and to let them know that it's part of their contract as well to represent us in a good way, to let the people know how it's going to impact them, to go that extra step on, knocking on their door when you're about to turn off their water, even though they did the door hanger, even though we did a postcard, even though, you know what I mean? And also being out there to, be friendly, sweep up the sidewalk, talk to that little old lady, whatever it might be. We are training them as well to help us out.
All right, let's take one more and then we'll.
I'm a Tempe resident also, and I get that annual survey from time to time. And every year I get it, I dutifully fill it out and provide specific comments. And I have to say, I've never once heard back from the city about the survey. So to this day, I have no idea if anyone gets it, if anyone reads it. I haven't gotten a response on any comments ever. So I'm just wondering, what do you do to communicate with citizens who do take the time to fill out the survey and let them know that you've received their comments and you value them?
The survey is administered by a different department. I'll let her get up there and tell you. But that's a good question, yeah.
So we administer the community survey every year. We started a business survey that we're doing every 2 years. But to answer your question, I think we can do a better job of putting out the information. We do it traditionally. We email, we put it on with Nikki's folks. We publicize it. We present it to mayor and council. We share with department heads to share with their departments. But I think sometimes it probably gets overlooked. And I think it's so darn good, the results, that I think more of the residents really should take the time to read that extensive report to see what they're saying.
Because it is done in aggregate and it's statistically valid, does the city have, you aren't supposed to necessarily know exactly which
Right,
homeowner.
right. So
it's a statistically valid survey, so they're trying to get enough population from each zip code, from each areas, and so the city isn't necessarily then, because it's done by a private vendor, responding and be like, hey, we heard you, because then you're like, that's kind of creepy, then what did I say? Because it's supposed to be in some cases somewhat anonymous. Not always, you can ask for follow-up, but it's not supposed to be that same one-on-one, you contacted us, you're expecting kind of.
quite frankly, I wonder if we take the time to ask our residents to participate, which is about 20 minutes that we ask of them to participate, maybe we do talk to the vendor and ask about how do we circle back with the folks. We don't have to do that, but maybe.
Here's where the results are.
Maybe we take those questions, since they are maybe potentially anonymous, and put them out there with some responses. If the questions are grouped around something like, condition of neighborhoods or special events or parks, that if there's enough of similar questions, we can put out, sort of a FAQ sort of thing where we're answering in the aggregate. So whereas you might not get a personal response, we can at least direct residents to a page where we're responding from the survey. It's good feedback. Yep. Cool. Very good. Thank you, Shauna. Well done. Now, without further ado, we will bring up our second presenters. All right, let's see. They are choosing to sit. Okay, very good. But stand is always an option. And you may need this, yes. There you go.
Good afternoon. I'm not going to touch it yet. Okay. This is Kathy Hollow. She's the Senior Civil Engineer of Public Works, and I'm Michelle Stokes. I'm the ADA Compliance Specialist for the City of Tempe. And we're sharing information about the Americans with Disabilities Act and Tempe's ADA Transition Plan. The ADA says that disability discrimination is illegal. But what is disability discrimination in city government? Everything we do is to be accessible. Sidewalks, bus stops, curb ramps, and more are to follow specific architectural standards that include accessibility. Non-compliance with those standards is considered by law to be disability discrimination. So with help from just about every city department, especially Public Works and Information Technology, we are reviewing Tempe to ensure everyone has access. Which button? We're going to fight over this, okay. Ah, got it, okay. The ADA transition plan falls under the quality of life council priority, and this performance measure is 3.14, which is to achieve accessible sidewalks, curb ramps, and crosswalks in all city rights-of-ways as outlined in the ADA transition plan. Now, this also includes other elements such as transit stops, traffic signals, parking, and more. In the future, we're going to be incorporating 3.15, which includes parks and city facilities, into this measure as well. So why does this measure matter? Why are we even here? It matters because Tempe cares about its residents, its visitors, and its businesses, and we want everyone to enjoy our city programs, services, and amenities. It matters because a transition plan to remove the architectural barriers is effective and efficient use of city resources that benefit everyone. To create this transition plan, Tempe decided to conduct a 3-phase evaluation. Now, where are we in the process? Phase 1 covered the downtown area, and it was completed last year. Phase 2 covers North Tempe, and we are in a 60-day public involvement process now, just like what you just heard about. That's what we're doing. Phase 3 covers South Tempe, and it will begin later this year. Now, what are we planning? Tempe's ADA transition plan details what needs to be repaired, what it costs, and a timeline for completion. We also need a way to track and report when those repairs are completed. So what is our target? What are we talking about here? We're talking about 100% compliance. That's a big goal. And our goal is to remove all identified barriers. So what I want to do next is give you one small example of what we're talking about. I want to show you what disability discrimination looks like. And when we're talking about architectural barriers. Now, are you ready? I hope you're ready for this, okay? What you're about to see can't be unseen, okay? You're about to see discrimination, okay? And it can't be unseen. What's inaccessible? These are benches on South McAllister. This is what discrimination looks like. Really? Is that really what discrimination looks like, a bench? So what's inaccessible about these benches on South McAllister? What makes it not inaccessible is that the benches have no back, no armrest, or too low to the ground. There's no accessible route to get near the benches, which are in what looks like, in this case, a planter area, and there's no clear space for a wheelchair user that has a firm and stable surface. Now, what is it supposed to be? It's supposed to be between 16 inches, between 17 and 19 inches in height, 20 to 24 inches in depth, and a clear space requires a firm and stable surface, okay? So it's like, okay, big deal. So some benches are not accessible, but so what? It's not a top priority, right? Even if it's technically discrimination, there's other things more important, right? It's just a bench. Yes? No? Well, let's take a closer look. Now what is not accessible? It's a bus stop. It's a city service. Now, Sometimes these bus stops are in Tempe, but they may or may not be our property. They may belong to ASU or some other group, some other jurisdiction, and we will work with them in order to get compliance. So these benches are at a bus stop. Let's look at another view. What else is not accessible? There's no firm and stable surface for a wheelchair user to board the bus. Gravel is not accessible, just so you know. Okay. Now, a closer look at the route to the bus stop. Is that accessible? We don't know. Just by looking at it, you can't tell. You can't tell. You can't do a drive-by and say, oh, that's accessible or that's not accessible. You have to get out and measure. You have to assess it. And that's what the ADA transition plan is about. So let's look at an ADA view of sidewalk access. Now, what you're seeing, those red lines show that the slope of the sidewalk is more than 5%. So you're tilted toward the planter. So if I'm in a wheelchair and I'm going to go toward the planter, okay? We don't want that. That's not accessible. So we're also going to look at what we're seeing in the view of sidewalk access. It's not just the bench, it's not just the bus stop, it's the sidewalk. All of this contributes to city services, transportation. Is it usable? Is it not usable? That's what discrimination looks like. So why does this matter? It matters that not only the bench is not accessible or the bus stop is not accessible, also what's not accessible is access to ASU from the bus stop, access to city businesses near the bus stop, access to government services, transportation, education, ASU housing, events. The ADA transition plan will solve this. That's why it matters. Doing this assessment allows us to identify what needs to be fixed, how much it costs to fix it. It provides a timeline, and we then can find the funding to deal with it. Now with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kathy.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Michelle just provided you a little snapshot of one area in the city, but our the evaluation plan will cover the whole city. So here's a map that shows the phase 1 boundaries. It's mostly downtown streets, the downtown parking, and 10 parks in the area. Phase 2 then took in the public infrastructure in the rest of North Tempe. This is north of Guadalupe, 9 parks. And then phase 3 will cover the rest of the infrastructure to the south of Guadalupe, the remaining parks, as well as all city buildings. Now, in doing this, we've collected lots and lots and lots of data. And with Stephanie's help, we were able to get this information integrated into the city's geographic information system. And this will be used first to plan the work that has to be done, and then further to track the work as it is completed. Take just a second to talk about the costs that have been developed for all the work that needs to be done. Phase 1, the estimated cost was $12 million for what was found. Phase 2, $38 million, and as we said, phase 3 is yet to be done. Our strategies, I think Michelle touched on a couple of these, but how we're completing this is reevaluating the existing conditions. As we said, we've done phase 1 and 2. We're getting public involvement all the way through the process. Then we'll prioritize the improvements that have been proposed and develop cost estimates so that the work can be budgeted. The projects then need to be designed. Some will be part of projects that are in the CIP, for example, or some specific ADA projects. Other designs will be done as maybe as repairs are done as part of our maintenance program. And then hopefully some of the repairs will be done as part of private development projects as well. The last step is to get the projects programmed into construction, and so that we are working towards making Tempe an accessible city for everyone. So we have summary of findings from phase 1 and phase 2, and they are both online on the city's website, www.tempe.gov/ADA. So you can get more information if you are interested. And with that, I think we would like to open it for questions.
I'll kick it off. So thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate it. I have a comment that's somewhat related, but not precisely. So now that we have this system of all these yellow and green bikes that people can kind of pick up and ride around and drop off, I've noticed a lot in driving through Tempe that these bikes are being abandoned along sidewalks, including in front of bus stops. And I'm thinking about my friends who are wheelchair bound and thinking, how do they get across the sidewalk when they can't move the bike out of the way? So they can't off-road it into gravel, and they can't turn around and go down a curb and take their wheelchair down the street so they can get in another curb and go around it. And I'm wondering if there's any concerns that the city has about that, and if so, is there anything that we're doing about that problem?
Understand is that we're in the process of setting up an agreement with these bike companies, and it's not just Tempe, it's the other surrounding cities as well. We're all having the same issue. And so that they're working towards setting up some kind of an agreement so that that doesn't occur.
Something engineering is involved with right now with our transit staff to come up with a permitting process that would address a lot of that those bikes can't be left in the right-of-way in a place that would cause access issues or a safety hazard. Such an emerging business model here in this area that we're in a bit of a react mode, but we are moving forward, and the other cities are kind of looking at us to see what we're going to do. And that should be coming forward to council in the next 4 to 6 weeks.
We must look heartless with all the bus stop that you showed. There's 835, I think, operating bus stops that we have. Maybe there's a few that's not ADA compliant. That one is actually out of a right-of-way. That's ASU's right-of-way, so that we could never improve it. But the bus stop is useful in one sense because it's the closest transport point to the light rail and other buses next to the ASU campus. The options we have are very limited in what we can do with this bus stop. We could pull it out. There's other bus stops, but it would be mean a little more walk for some people. But, you know, there are restrictions that we have to deal with. And one of them is bus stops that are not in the right-of-way or we don't have enough right-of-way.
I think that one thing we could possibly do is work towards getting an easement from some of these other property owners so that, for example, we have benches out there. I would assume that we got permission to put the benches out there. So at the same time, hopefully, at least going forward, we are constructing them or getting the space that we need so we can construct it to be compliant.
The benches were taken out a long time ago. Those were given to ASU to protect the surrounding areas so that people don't go in and destroy the plantings. That's why they are there. We didn't provide them as somebody to sit in there. So,
but the sign is there. The sign is there.
I've worked with ASU on this one. I've been here 20 years, and they won't give us anything on that side.
That's a good clarification, I think, from my perspective, and understanding that our ability to influence and to make changes in these areas, it's part of the reason why we measure and we think about strategies, I think. It's because we understand that sometimes moving from where we are to where we want to be, we know and we can identify gaps in our ability to do that. And if one of those gaps is we have other entities, ASU or private businesses or school, or wherever it may be, and we say part of our barrier to being able to get to where we want to be is our ability to actually work with these groups and get them at the table to address some of these things, is exactly the sort of thing that We want to be able to focus our attention so that we know where are we going to be able to get the most effect in the areas that need it the most, and how are we going to build a strategy around that. So I think you're right. I mean, I think, you know, none of us here, I want to start with Baylor, we all, I think, take this very seriously. And I think as a city, since the ADA has passed, we've made great leaps forward. And even in the last 3 to 4 years, just the push by our council to create accessibility in city parks for pathways and curb cuts and all kinds of things that we never had before. I mean, we're talking, you know, 25 to 27 years after the ADA has passed. What it shows is we have a lot of work we've done. There's always going to be more we can do. And getting towards that and measuring it effectively is going to be our challenge in any of these situations.
And just so you know, I didn't pick on that one. I simply pulled it out of the pile, and there it was.
That's not good.
I have 2 questions. The first is...
Wait, 1 sec.
Yeah, you do. 2 questions. The first is, do we have a suggestions and comments box, as it were, that's accessible online, that people can say, hey, I've noticed this thing that could be better, and here's how I think it could be better?
Actually, if you go to tempe.gov/ADA and look under the transition plan, there's a survey where you can put information. Also, you can email me at any time. If there's something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, that's something we're always looking at. You'll see this board over here. Those are priorities. I've been to 2 meetings already in the public. Asked them, hey, prioritize those items, and they have. That's one thing we do. The other thing we do is if you email me or you fill out those surveys, especially the surveys will be included in the transition plan. So if you say, hey, this intersection's really, really bad, we can prioritize it higher. We're looking for, especially for those things that are safety related. You know, we don't want anybody getting hurt on our streets, and so it's because of an ADA issue. The other thing that you can do is, if you know of a neighborhood that's not included in the ADA transition plan, we can meet with the resident, find out what is needed to make that neighborhood accessible, and work on that.
The second question I have is more specific to facility improvements and general accessibility. I've been dealing with accessibility issues for 20 years because I work in theater, and we have been aware of the need to be accessible for a long time. And I have a bit of insight into that because of it, but I know a lot of people who work in other facilities may not have the level of insight I have, and I wouldn't even say that my level is sufficient. Do you have any literature or documentation available for people working in the various facilities so that we can be prepared to identify challenges and work towards fixing them before we have to bring you guys in to do a mass search and assess our site so that we can get a step up on the process?
So the ADA is available online, so you can look at that. And also those times when our community development department can advise if there's a lot of different ways to get information ahead of time if it's a specific area. And one of the things we're doing right now with the ADA transition plan is, let's say there's private development, we're cross-referencing it so that, oh, we see those curbs that are needed over here. Well, let's get that involved with that. So that may be part of the solution. The other thing is that there's so many, and we provide some training as well. There's an ADA coordinators coalition that I'm part of, and we're looking to provide training to a lot of different folks. So that's coming up. There's different ways to get the information, but if you'd like to talk after, I'd be happy to share more with you.
Sure, yeah, I was just thinking something along the lines of an ADA for Dummies guidebook. I've done some reading of codes, and well, that's not exciting at all. It can be painful.
At the risk of sticking my foot in it by volunteering my work unit, I can let you know that with respect to legal issues, the city attorney's office may be able to help. So if you do have a legal question that's coming up in your work unit and you need some help sort of translating law to English or some, some understandable format, please give us a call.
The last thing I'd like to say also is that in the back of the room, we have a summary report of phase 2, and it's available online also. We have it in both regular English, regular print, and we have it in what we call Easy English. Easy English is written at a 5th grade level. It's specifically made so that people who have intellectual disabilities, reading disabilities, can understand it better. Take a look at it, see what you like of it.
All right. Thank you. And I would just mention real quick before you go that we talk about access and accessibility under the ADA. There is a small bit of irony that we're doing so in this particular room, because we know that, no, seriously, we know for a fact this is sort of like the seat of public discourse in our government. And there's ADA challenges in this very room in terms of the slope of the building, the design of the seating, et cetera. In fact, you can see chairs and spaces around here where we've removed seating so there can be wheelchair access at different parts of the building. But I will say that on that note, and we're not just talking about the physical access issues, but this year, for the first time, we've begun to closed caption broadcast our council meetings. So for the hearing impaired, there's a better heightened level of access than there has ever been before. So I appreciate the work that you've done for that, Michelle and Kathy, and thank you so much for your presentation today. Thank you. All right. So a couple of announcements. Again, if you have your agendas, there are places where you can fill out additional questions, comments, and feedback for our presenters so they can take that back. We'll collect them up and we'll send them on to the teams so that they continue to improve with their work on their performance measures. And join us for our next Tempe Accelerates on April, when's our next one, Rosa? I'm sorry. You had the list and I just, April 19th? Traffic. It'll be traffic. It's going to be a single subject, not two, because we anticipate a robust discussion about traffic. And we're even looking potentially at possibly moving the venue and the time, because that's one where we expect that we may invite and have more public participation, i.e. more than just city employees. So we look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, keep bringing on your good questions and feedback. Thank you.